Salam alaikum, guys. This is another Zoom video. It's the history of the Mughal Empire. Me and Kurulush Dirilish Edits, also known as KDE, made this presentation. So I hope you guys will enjoy it. Please can everyone remain on mute and have their cameras off so there's no disturbance. And we shall start now, inshallah. So the history of the Mughal Empire. Let's go to the next slide. So let's go to the origins of the Mughal dynasty. So the Mughal dynasty stems from many conquerors and figures, the most famous of which are Genghis Khan and Tamerlane, as you can see on the screen. Genghis Khan obviously was the founder of the Mughal Empire, Mongol Empire, sorry, and Tamerlane was Timur was the founder of the Timurid Empire, which conquered India and so on, and obviously beat the Ottomans in the Battle of Ankara and killed Sultan Bayezid or imprisoned him, and then he died. But either way, the Timurids and that's where the Mughal dynasty stemmed from. The Mughals do not follow the Mongol traditions or religions of like Tengriism and Buddhism. They didn't follow that. They instead followed the religion of Islam and the traditions of the Timurids, because Timurids were obviously Muslim. The Timur invaded India at the time the Tughlaq dynasty was recovering from the blunders caused by Muhammad bin Tughlaq. So Muhammad bin Tughlaq wasn't a great leader, in my opinion. He made many mistakes and didn't do too much good for the empire of the Tughlaqs. And Babur invaded India and defeated Ibrahim Lodi in the Battle of Panipat, which established the Mughal dynasty. So Babur was obviously the founder of the Mughal Empire. He was a descendant of both Genghis Khan and Timurlane. And he was someone who was kicked out of his lands many times, and we have another slide separate just based on him, so I'll talk about him in a moment. So Ibrahim Lodi, they were all, right now India was not a stable area to live in at that time, like in the 1500s. India wasn't a stable place because there was changing of empires and stuff like that. However, when the Mughals came in, they brought a bit of stability and they ruled for a long period of time. So that's where the Mughal Empire stems from. Now we'll go on to talking about, I think I need to color that. I'll go on to talk about Babur and Humayun. So Humayun was the son of Babur, but Babur was the first leader of the Mughal Empire. He was exiled from his lands multiple times until he eventually founded the Mughal Empire in Delhi. So Babur, he's actually originally an Uzbek, so he's from Uzbekistan. And he had been kicked out. He tried to take a bit of Indian land before. Obviously, he created the dynasty in 1526, I believe. But he was, it says that he founded the state in 1526. But can you please make sure you're on mute? Sorry. But he eventually obviously created the Mughal Empire, Mughal dynasty. But it was a small piece of land. It wasn't a massive piece of land. It wasn't a great state or stuff like that. At the beginning, it was him, and he just took a small piece of basically just took Delhi and created the state from there. And then you see like the succession of Humayun. So Humayun, well, I have an interesting story about Humayun. So you can read the surface on what's here, but I'll just add some knowledge and add some more input, because this is where you can see what's here. So Humayun was the third son of Babur and the second sultan of the Mughals. He became sultan after Babur. However, in the middle of his reign, he ruled for, I think, 30 years. Well, technically 30 years, but he wasn't in charge of the entire Mughal Empire at the time, because Shah Jahan, who was another sultan in India, he went to war with him and he was defeated. The Mughals were defeated. So the Humayun had to go into neighboring Safavids lands, and the Safavids were obviously in Iran, Persia, Azerbaijan, etc. So Humayun went there, but however, Humayun, what he said to the Safavids is, the Safavids, if you give me help. So the Safavids said, we'll give you help, but you need to convert to Shiaism. So on the surface, Humayun technically converted to Shiaism. However, whether he was actually Shia and just said he was and used the Shiaism to get the Safavid support is unknown. But on the surface of things, which is the only thing we can see realistically, he was a Shia. But what's interesting is that none of his successors and the Mughal line never again had any Shia line. So he clearly didn't teach his sons to be Shia or anything, but he himself claimed that he was Shia. But after Shah Jahan's death in 1555, he would go back into Mughal lands where he'd reclaim his throne and become officially the sultan, but he would only rule for unfortunately 1 year. Because however, his successor would rule for a lot longer, and his successor was none other than the legendary Akbar. Akbar the Great ruled the Mughals during its golden age. He became the sultan after his father Humayun's death in 1556, and he was only 13 years old. Okay, and an interesting thing about here is he had many advisors. One was his wet nurse, who basically was the regent when he was in court, and the other was almost like his uncle, is another man who was a regent when he went to war. Akbar expanded the empire to almost the entire Indian subcontinent. You can see here, actually, you can see this map, look how much he took. He just left the south. He didn't expand much southwards because that would happen under Shah Jahan and Jahan Shah, and Aurangzeb, but he expanded to all of that area, and you can see how much area he took. And his reign was seen with extreme success, not only in terms of land, but also economically. He is considered one of the richest people ever to exist, and the Mughals reached economic heights under him, like ridiculous heights, where it was scary how powerful and how rich the Mughals were, because obviously India is very rich in natural resources, and this was the Indian subcontinent. Actually, the entire subcontinent is rich in natural resources, and Akbar utilized this, and he clearly was a good sultan in terms of that. And that there were peace between Hindus and Muslims was secured under his reign, and he had strong relations with other Islamic empires, such as the Ottomans. He didn't have really good relations with the Safavids, because the Safavids obviously were Shia, and they kind of were a bit iffy in terms of relations. But other than that, he was a good sultan in terms of keeping relations with the Islamic Empire. Now, there's one thing which I clearly didn't write on here, which is obviously the Deen Ilahi. The Deen Ilahi was apparently a religion which Akbar invited many people to, which was almost a combination of Hinduism and Islam. Now, was Akbar a part of this religion? It is unknown. Many scholars and many people, from what I've read, say that he did not enter this religion himself, and the main reason he did this was not religiously, but more politically, to keep the peace between Hindus and Muslims. And it wasn't to create a whole new religion because he thought he was God, or he thought he was this and that. Most people say the reason that he did this was political, so he could keep. Sorry, I'm just going to fix the microphone. So he could keep the peace between the Hindus and Muslims, and not have instability during his reign, which he ruled for a really, really long time. He ruled from 1556 to 1605. Like, that's a really long time, and that's a lot of time that he can mess up. But he kept the peace, and that allowed him to expand into north of India, and took a bit of Afghanistan as well, and obviously entire Pakistan and almost all of India, and he took a bit of Bangladesh as well. So this is all, obviously back then it wasn't known as Bangladesh, India, Pakistan. It was all just under Mughal control. However, southwards they didn't control, and that was not an issue, but they couldn't take control of that. And he died in 1605, and the Mughals were set into basically turmoil. Another thing about Akbar is the fact that because he was so young, he had his whole life ahead, and he was able to learn from experience. And he was a noble military conqueror, and he was famous for his good treatment of prisoners and stuff like that, which is quite interesting and not talked about much about Akbar, and how his character was very good, and how he, as a leader, expanded so much, which other leaders of the Mughals could not do, except from one who you can see at the bottom of the screen. His name is there. But Akbar, yeah, I've spoken about him, and I think maybe there'll be some questions about him at the end of this Zoom. So I'll see there if there'll be any questions. But for now, that's all I'm saying about Akbar. Jahangir and Shah Jahan. So Jahangir was the son and successor of Akbar, who ruled for 22 years from 1605 to 1627. His real name was actually Nuruddin Muhammad Salim, but Jahangir means the conqueror of the world. And that's how they viewed themselves, the sultans of the Mughals. They viewed themselves as they should be the rulers of the world, and they should be conquerors and everything like that. And that's why Jahangir is considered such a, he didn't do too much in his reign. There's not much known about his reign from me and KDE's research. We couldn't find too much significance. Like what he was planning to do was ally with other Islamic empires such as the Ottomans, Uzbeks, and to fight against the Safavids, which is obviously, Muslims fighting Muslims, which isn't good, but at least there's an ally. They're trying to make allies with other empires. Also, he's known for for almost taking parts of what's it called, southern India, but not being able to do too much in conquest. But I think he is one of the middle sultans who you consider isn't the worst and isn't the best, but isn't the worst. And it's just like normal. He's a normal sultan who ruled fairly well, and he was trying to unite the Islamic world. And he made some peace deals with the Ottomans and some peace deals with the Uzbeks, but he couldn't do this. Didn't formalize anything because he died, so he couldn't keep the state in order. Shah Jahan. So Shah Jahan has a lot of controversy on. Many people say that because he didn't care too much on his state. So he was the successor of Jahangir and ruled for 30 years. And although he ruled for a long time, many people say he wasn't focused on his state because he was a romantic. They say he was a romantic. At this time, his harem had a lot of influence, and the wives and stuff, they would have a lot of power in the court, which is obviously not common at that time. And other things is that he gave a lot of power to his grand viziers and advisors, which is obviously like if you with this monarchy, you obviously wouldn't give too much power to them, and he would have complete power, but he wasn't the best sultan. He was often controlled by others, and he wasn't able to expand the empire to great extents. And that's what I think is interesting about Shah Jahan in terms of that way. He didn't do too much for a state, but he didn't do too bad for a state either. In terms of, I think he's one of the worst sultans. Okay, what we'll do is we'll rule out all the sultans after the East Indian Company came in. He is the worst one up to that point. Obviously, after that, they were puppets, but up to that point, he was the worst. And obviously, he made the Taj Mahal, which you can see here. The Taj Mahal was mainly built for his wife, Mumtaz, and that's to show his love. So again, showing romantic, but then he's spending his state's money on building a structure which could have been used for other things such as expanding the empire or used on the army or given to his people, which would have made his people happier with his rule, because Shah Jahan didn't control too much and he wasn't a very successful sultan in terms of conquest and in terms of his people's opinion on him. However, people's opinion on the next sultan, which is obviously Aurangzeb. So Aurangzeb was a third son of Shah Jahan, and he became the governor of Agra. Sorry, I don't know why that went. So he slowly started to build a large following because he was the third son. Typically, it would be the oldest son who would become sultan if the rest would just accept it, or it would be the person who was the sultan, the son who was still alive. Aurangzeb was a third son, and because of that, he knew it would be unlikely that he would succeed his father. So to establish his rule, he revolted against his father. Now, this is where a slight controversy came in. Is it all right? Is it acceptable that he revolted against his father and won the war and then killed his brothers and jailed his father? Obviously, philosophically, it's not acceptable. And people can't just say Aurangzeb, it was okay that he did that because he killed his father. He killed his brothers and jailed his father. But when you look at in terms of how in his perspective, he saw that the empire might not be united and stuff like that. But I think that killing his brothers was unnecessary, and he obviously jailed his father because he couldn't kill his father. That would cause too much unrest. Aurangzeb came to the throne in 1658 and ruled for 49 years, the most of any sultan of the Mughals, and almost the same amount of time as Sultan Suleiman, who ruled obviously a different time period, but ruled for, I think it was 46 years. So Sultan Suleiman of the Ottomans and Aurangzeb of the Mughals, who are basically the people who ruled for the longest of each empire. This period saw a huge expansion for the Mughals, huge expansion, because Aurangzeb wasn't just keen on protecting his empire, he was keen on expanding it, which hadn't been seen before because of Shah Jahan. Because Shah Jahan wasn't keen on expanding, he was more focused on keeping the stability and stuff like that. But for Aurangzeb, he wanted to expand. He wanted to keep the empire protected. And most of his treasury he gave to the army. But obviously, he did not give too much to his state and people, which caused some revolts, because if he's giving a lot to his army, he'd have some for himself, but then he won't give any to his state. But he was able to expand so much that it made up for it, almost. Basically, it made up. The people were quite happy, except he was very deeply religious, but some people were beginning to say that he began taxing the non-Muslim subjects a bit too much, and the state turned from almost a majority Hindu to majority Muslim empire during his reign. And that's that. We'll talk about that after, and maybe in the questions section of this Zoom. But he was very deeply religious, and he wanted to promote Islam to his people, and that's, I think, why he revolted against his father as well, because he saw that his father wasn't as Islamic in terms of his ways of ruling and stuff like that. Not to tax non-Muslims higher, but the way that he was ruling, he wasn't focused on his state, he wasn't focused on his deen, he was just kind of not too focused. And that's what we can say about Shah Jahan. And Aurangzeb, what he was able to do was solidify and expand the Mughal rule within Indian subcontinent. And he died on the 3rd of March, 1707. And unfortunately, after his death, 50 years later, the British are there. And we'll talk about that in a few moments. But Aurangzeb's rule, I think you can see that it's viewed with huge success. Like, how people view him is they view him as one of the great sultans, him and Akbar together. Because Akbar was obviously able to expand northwards, but he was able to expand southwards. If you go back to the map, I'll show you now. If you go back to this map, you can see that this expansion southwards was all under mainly Aurangzeb. Jahan Shah didn't do much. So after Aurangzeb, we have the fall of the Mughals. Now you might be a bit confused because can you please? Would you like to speak?
Echt super jongen. Ben normalde böyle şeyler sevmem.
Would you like to speak?
Ne yapacaksın? Yemek yemeyeceğiz mi?
Sorry, I just muted you. I'm sorry. The fall of the Mughals. So in the late 16th century, so you might be a bit confused because we were just in 1707, and now we're talking about the fall of the Mughals, which happened in 1858. Let's explain. So in the 16th century, at the time of the founding of the state, not only was the Mughals founded, but the European nations such as Portugal, maybe even France as well, England. It was mainly Portugal first, though. Portugal found a way of reaching India without having to travel through the Black Sea and without having to travel through Ottoman lands, because they didn't want to travel through Ottoman lands, because that means that they would have to pay a tax on the goods and stuff that would come in. So they tried to find a way around, and they found a way around Africa. So around Africa, which would take obviously a long time, but it would be a bit easier. And this was after they discovered quote unquote discovered the New World, and they found a way of reaching India without having to travel through the Black Sea. So by the 1600s, so the 17th century, many European nations had formal relations with the Mughal Empire, especially, and the interesting stories is the British writing letters to the Mughal Empire and making deals with them and stuff like that. But the Mughals, let's put it this way. Someone put something in chat. Let's put it this way. The Mughals were one of the most powerful empires ever to exist. And then exists the British, who were a small island nation. And the Mughals basically were almost forced into making deals with them, trade deals with them, which didn't make the Mughals any richer. It just made the British rich, which seems obviously, and you see how they slowly manipulated them. And by the 1758, the British, the East Indian Company, so there was an East Indian Company which they used for trade. And obviously there were other battles within the Indian subcontinent, the 7 Years' War and stuff like that, between the British and French and Portuguese and all these stuff, which there was wars between them. But by 1758, the British, through the East Indian Company, virtually took over the entire Mughal Empire by manipulating its leader and peoples. So the monarchy, when you type in the fall of the Mughals, you'll see that it says the state fell in 1858. This is because in 1758, the British let the Mughals have the Sultan as the helm. However, he was a puppet of the British, and the British manipulated him and made it seem as if and made it so that he would not have any power, and it was basically the British ruling the entire Indian subcontinent. However, because the Mughals didn't want this to occur, in 1858 they eventually fought back, and it was against the British, but unfortunately they were defeated. And this is where you see how unable the Mughals were to see the British's plans, how the British basically planned to make it a colony, to make India a colony of the British, but they couldn't see that. And in 1858 they were virtually a colony anyways. They finally fought back. It was a close war, but the British won and were ultimately defeated the Mughals. Monarchy was abolished, and India, for the first time, this is the entire Indian subcontinent, because obviously before it wasn't India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, it was just India, were defeated and empire and monarchy abolished, and India became an outright colony of the British Empire, thus sealing the fate of the Mughal Empire. The Mughals, they ruled for only, I think it was 200 years, 220 years. That's all they ruled for, 220 or maybe 30 years. And that's it. And they were defeated by the British, as most empires are. So that's the end of the presentation, guys. Now we'll have the questions. So does anyone have any questions? You can unmute if you desire to unmute, if you wish to unmute. If you wish, or you can just type it into chat.
Bhai, I have a question.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Please ask a question.
Yeah, I missed the first part because my son, he wasn't asleep. So can I listen to the first part later, maybe? Do you have the recordings?
Yes, this video will be out on YouTube in about an hour or so. I'll post it on YouTube. But do you have any questions about what you've seen about the Mughals, so you can see? I'll show you.
No, actually it was quite, how do I say that? You didn't leave any room for questions because it was so informative, and I understood everything. So
Thank you so
great.
much. Jazakallah.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So no questions. KDE, do you have anything to say? You can put it in chat if you wish. So we have just a few minutes left. Let me check chat, what people are saying. Okay, I think we might end it there. I think, KDE, do you have anything that you want to say in chat? Anything? Had a lot of fun making the presentation with you, gathered a lot of info, and I'd like to have another presentation with you in the future, inshallah. Inshallah, man. I think we did a really good job in terms of the way that we work together in research, and we want to say all cinematics is trying to join back. Let's add all cinematics and let him ask a question if he wishes. But yeah, KDE, me and you, man, I really enjoyed making this presentation with you because I think we did all cinematics. If you have any questions, KDE, I really enjoyed making this presentation with you as well, man. It was really fun, and I really got to know about your knowledge, which you have a lot of knowledge about the Mughal Empire, guys. You might not know this, but KDE has a lot of knowledge about the Mughals, and if you don't know now, you know, because even though he's an editor, he has mashallah a lot of knowledge, and he was able to impart a lot of knowledge on me as well, especially about the late sultans of like Shah Jahan and stuff like that. So we want to say thank you guys for all joining the Zoom. Shout out to KDE who made the presentation with me and taught me a lot as well. All cinematics, you have a few seconds to ask a question because I know you accidentally left. So you can ask a question now if you wish, man. No question, really. All right, that's it then, guys. I thank everyone who joined. I know it wasn't many people today. I think because this subject is a bit different from other subjects that I do, because I normally do it about a show or something like that. And I normally do about other things, like when I did the last one, it was about Barbaros, and the other one was about the Dirilish Osman. Sorry, Dirilish Ertuğrul, Kuruluş Osman, and even before I did that, I did the Uyanış Big Selçuklu. So I get why people didn't join this one, because it's kind of a different topic, but I hope everyone who did join enjoyed it. So I hope you guys all enjoyed it. And KDE, massive shout out to KDE. I really loved making this presentation with you, man. And that's it, guys. Thank you all for joining. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.